My name is Emily Carter. I'm 36 years old, living in Austin, Texas. For the past 6 years, I have worked full-time as a chief accountant while raising 2 young children and grinding through night classes to earn my MBA at the University of Texas. 6 years of waking up at 5:30 every morning. 6 years of eating rush dinners in the driver's seat. 6 years of trading time with my kids for lectures, assignments, and endless group projects. Today, all of that effort was supposed to be distilled into one single moment. The moment I walked across the stage to receive my degree, with the applause of the people I love most surrounding me. But as I stepped into the center of the crowded auditorium, the bright lights spilling over the front VIP row, my heart sank. 6 seats marked with my family's names, all completely empty. No parents, no Lily, my younger sister. No Mark, my husband. No Noah and Grace, my 2 children, the ones I had always hoped would watch their mother be recognized after all those sacrifices. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile, though my throat felt tight as if it were bound. The applause had barely begun when my phone buzzed faintly in my pocket. I slipped it out and glanced at the screen. It was a string of freshly posted photos from my parents, everyone gathered at Lily's backyard BBQ, raising glasses, hugging, laughing under the afternoon sun. No congratulatory message. Not a single mention of my graduation. The feeling wasn't exactly surprise, it was more like an old wound being ripped open again, deeper, sharper, because it hit me that I had never truly been their priority. And I wondered, among those watching now, how many of you have stood in what was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of your life, only to find yourself utterly alone, abandoned by the very people you call family? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments, so I'll know I'm not the only one. I was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas, in a single-story white house with a low wooden fence and a front yard my mother tended with care. On paper, Lily and I were only 4 years apart, but the gap in how our parents treated us felt like 2 entirely different worlds. From as early as I can remember, I could see that their eyes, their smiles, and their attention always seemed reserved for Lily. She was the golden girl of the family, pretty, lively, charming, with a way of melting everyone's heart. I was different, quieter, cautious, and used to handling things on my own. Every basketball season, my parents never missed a single one of Lily's games. They wore t-shirts with her jersey number, carried poster boards, and cheered until their voices were hoarse. I can still recall those cold winter nights, the wind slapping my face as my parents drove Lily to away games in other cities, while I sat in the back seat doing homework under dim streetlights. In contrast, when I received awards for academic excellence or first place in debate competitions, I would stand on stage scanning the crowd for my parents only to accept the truth that they weren't there. My mother would often say, "Next time, we'll try to make it," but that next time almost never came. The height of this favoritism might have been when I turned 18. On Lily's 18th birthday, my parents secretly bought her a brand new Honda Civic, tied with a red bow, parked right in front of the house. I remember her squealing with joy, wrapping her arms around them, while I stood off to the side, happy for her but feeling that sting in my chest. And me? When I was old enough to drive, I had to work 2 jobs, mornings at a coffee shop and evenings at a bookstore for nearly 8 months to buy a used Toyota Corolla with faded paint and a torn backseat. My parents didn't object, but they didn't help or encourage me either. My mother only said, "It's good you can be independent like that." I told myself I didn't need anything more, but deep down, I still wished that just once, I could be treated like Lily. As we grew up, that gap never narrowed, it only became more defined. Every holiday, every gift, every word of praise, even the stories told at the dinner table, always revolved around Lily. Lily just landed a new contract. Lily repainted her house, it looks so lovely. Lily really is the child who makes us proud. I would sit there, forcing a smile, adding a few words here and there to make it seem like I didn't feel left out, while inside I felt hollow. I used to tell myself maybe I was just being too sensitive, that perhaps my parents did love me but expressed it differently. But over time, the pieces of memory piled up, and I could no longer deny it. In this family equation, I was always the afterthought, always the one who had to figure out how to survive without expecting anyone to come to my rescue. The irony is that, because I was never the priority, I learned to be strong and independent very early on. But the price was a series of emotional voids that stretched through my childhood and into adulthood. And those voids left deep marks, so that even at 36, I still sometimes feel like that same little girl, standing outside the window, watching the whole family gathered around Lily, not knowing I was silently wishing for just one glance back. Mark, my husband, was once the one bright spot in my life, the person who saw and touched the wounds I had always tried to hide. We met in Austin, not long after I moved from San Antonio to work at a mid-sized real estate company right after graduating college. Back then, I still carried the weight of feeling out of place and less than from my entire childhood, but Mark was different. He listened patiently as I told him about family gatherings where I was always the one on the edge of the photo, about the important holidays where I was forgotten. He held my hand and told me, "You deserve to be at the center," and at the time, I believed he would be my safe place to come home to. In the early years of our marriage, Mark was my biggest cheerleader in every dream I had. When I told him I wanted to pursue an MBA, he not only supported me but said, "I'll take care of the kids, just focus on your studies." I thought, at last, I had someone who believed I could be both a good mother and have a career of my own. But things began to change once I officially enrolled. Evening MBA classes meant I had to leave the office at 5 p.m., rush to campus, and return home close to 10 at night. 3 nights a week like that, on top of group assignments, case studies, and research papers, meant the time I spent with my family shrank drastically. At first, Mark stayed understanding, but gradually, his patience wore thin. The comments started lightly. "Off to chase your professor again?" But sharpened into comparisons. "Other wives know how to balance family better. Maybe you should learn from them." I swallowed every word, telling myself this was only a temporary rough patch, that they would understand once they saw the results. My job at the real estate company was anything but easy. As chief accountant, I was responsible for managing millions of dollars every month, catching errors that could jeopardize entire contracts. Every morning at 5:30, I got up while it was still dark, heading to the kitchen to make breakfast for Noah and Grace. Noah, 13, was at that moody in-between stage and often grumbled when woken early. Grace, 10, still liked having me braid her hair and slip a small note into her lunchbox. I did all of that knowing I'd be home late that evening and likely miss dinner with them. After dropping the kids off at school, I rushed to the office and began a long day of spreadsheets, emails, and meetings. When work ended, I navigated Austin's crowded streets to get to my MBA classes, where I was one of the few students juggling both a family and a full-time career. On winter nights, when the drizzle fell and the wind cut against my skin, I still sat in class until 9 o'clock, then drove home through the darkness. There were evenings when I was so exhausted I wanted nothing more than to turn off my alarm and let everything go, but I kept reminding myself that every sacrifice I made now was for the sake of a better future for my family. I dreamed of the day I could earn a promotion, a salary high enough to send my children to good schools, and have the means to take the whole family on trips together. But in reality, those sacrifices weren't always understood. One evening, when I walked in the door after class, Noah stepped out of the living room, his face tight. "You never play with me anymore, Mom." His words were short, but they pierced like a knife. I had missed movie nights with him, evenings doing homework with Grace, and the dinners Mark wanted us all to have together. I wanted to explain to Noah that everything I was doing was to give him a better future, but I knew that at his age, those words would sound like nothing more than the wind. Mark didn't hide his frustration either. Once, when I excitedly told him I had earned an A on my business strategy paper, he merely raised an eyebrow and said, "And after you graduate? Then what? Do you think the kids will remember that, A, or that you were never home to eat dinner with them?" It wasn't a question, it was a verdict. I forced a smile, but, inside, I was shaken. He had once been the person who believed in me the most, yet now he was the first to question the worth of what I was working toward. Weekends were no longer a time to rest either. If I wasn't writing papers, I was at the library for group meetings or attending seminars. Mark often said he felt like a part-time single dad. I heard him and felt guilty, but at the same time, I felt it was unfair because I wasn't pursuing this degree to satisfy my own ego, but to open better opportunities for our entire family. As graduation drew closer, the pressure only grew heavier. I could see the distance between Mark and me widening with each passing day. Our conversations became short and transactional, revolving around school drop-offs, bills, and overlapping schedules. I still tried to make up for it in small ways, leaving notes on the bathroom mirror, video calling the kids during breaks, or bringing home Mark's favorite takeout as a surprise. But none of it seemed enough to bring him back to me the way it once had. There were nights, after the whole house had gone to sleep, when I sat alone at the kitchen table, turning the pages of my textbooks and wondering if I was losing my family in the process of trying to build a future for them. But whenever I thought about quitting, I remembered my childhood in San Antonio, those times I was forgotten, placed last, and I knew I couldn't let history repeat itself. I wanted my children to see how their mother fought to claim her place, to live without depending on anyone else's approval. And so, I kept going. Even though sometimes, on the drive from the office to campus, I felt like I was walking a tightrope stretched between two worlds, one where my family wanted more of my presence, and one where my career and goals, I believed, would change all of our lives. I only hoped that when the day came for me to stand on that stage and receive my degree, they would understand that every drop of sweat, every moment away from home, had been for them. What I didn't know was that very day would become the clearest proof that I had overestimated the presence of the people I loved most. The day I had longed for finally arrived. I had been preparing for my graduation for a month in advance, gathering as much excitement as I could after 6 long years of perseverance. In my mind, everything needed to be perfect and dignified, not because I wanted to show off, but because this was the biggest milestone in my life since getting married and having children. I wanted the day to be remembered not just for the degree, but for the image of my whole family sharing that moment together. I chose a sophisticated Italian restaurant in downtown Austin with warm golden lighting, crisp white tablecloths, and wooden chairs upholstered in deep blue velvet. It wasn't a cheap choice, but I wanted a place special enough to honor the effort I had put in. I reserved a table for 8, myself, Mark, Noah, Grace, my parents, Lily, and her boyfriend. The restaurant manager even promised to give us a corner table by the window, overlooking the lake, with bottles of red wine ready and a large tiramisu with "Congratulations, Emily," written in chocolate. Then, I spent an entire Saturday afternoon searching for the perfect dress. After trying on several, I finally chose an elegant navy piece made from a soft fabric that fit me just right, knee-length, with a gentle V-neckline that was still modest. The navy blue not only complemented my skin tone but also made me feel confident and steady, exactly the kind of woman I had worked so hard to become over the years. I booked a hair and makeup appointment at my regular salon, making sure to tell the stylist I wanted a natural look, so that when I looked back at photos years later, I would still see myself as I truly was. I didn't forget to arrange accommodations for my parents, knowing the drive from San Antonio to Austin would take nearly 2 hours. I booked them a room at a small boutique hotel near the university, with a balcony overlooking the street, so they could rest and easily make it to the ceremony the next morning. When I sent the booking confirmation to the family group chat, I waited for at least some sort of reply, but Lily simply wrote, "Congrats." No follow-up questions, no sign she was planning to attend or making any arrangements. Even though I'd grown used to her indifference, my heart still skipped a beat. I told myself it was fine as long as my parents and Lily were there, it would be enough. Mark was different, at least, at the time, he gave me a sense of reassurance. When I shared everything I had prepared, he took my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, "The kids and I will be in the front row. You don't have to worry." Those words felt like an anchor, keeping me from being pulled into the fear of facing another row of empty seats. I believed him, because even though there had been distance between us during my years in school, I still thought graduation day was something we were both looking forward to. I even picked out the nicest outfits for Noah and Grace to wear to the ceremony. Noah would wear a white dress shirt, khaki pants, and a navy blazer, while Grace would wear the white dress with the bow in the back that she loved so much. I pictured myself standing on stage, looking down to see them sitting next to their father, waving and smiling brightly. Just the thought of it made every bit of exhaustion feel worth it. I went to bed later than usual that night, double-checking every detail, the invitations, the ceremony schedule, the restaurant's opening hours, even the weather forecast for the next day. I wanted to make sure nothing could go wrong. Mark sat in the living room watching television, occasionally calling out, "Are you done yet?" I answered, almost, smiling to myself at the thought that tomorrow he would be there, proud as I received my degree. Throughout the preparations, I tried to push away the unhappy memories of my childhood, the times my parents had chosen to prioritize Lily over me. I wanted to believe this time would be different, that they would understand how much this day meant to me. I even sent them an email reminding them of the time and place, and suggested that my mother wear a pastel-colored dress so our family photos would look nice. She only replied with a curt, "Okay." I chose to take it as agreement. Maybe I was too optimistic, or maybe I was simply choosing to believe what I wanted to hear rather than reality. But in that moment, buried in to-do lists and anticipation, I felt I had done everything I could to ensure tomorrow would be a beautiful memory. What I couldn't have known was that all of that meticulous preparation would serve only as the backdrop for the most painful moment of my life. About a week before graduation, I was in the office reviewing the quarterly report when my phone buzzed. Lily's name lit up on the screen, and I couldn't help but smile. Even though our relationship had never been truly close, I wanted to believe that this time, she was calling to ask about the ceremony or at least to confirm her plans to attend. I picked up, keeping my voice cheerful. "Hi, Lily." On the other end, her voice burst with excitement, fast and breathless, as if she was afraid she wouldn't have enough time to get it all out. "Big news, sis. I just leased a new space in San Antonio, and next week I'm opening my BBQ restaurant. In 3 weeks, I'm throwing a huge party to celebrate. I want you and the whole family to come." I froze for a second, then reminded her, "Next week." "Lily, that's my graduation day." I spoke slowly, making sure she heard every word. There was a brief pause, and then she gave a small laugh, her tone carrying a hint of embarrassment but no sign she would change her plans. "Oh, I forgot. But I've already sent invitations to a dozen business partners, and I even booked a live band. I can't change it now." She said it as if this were just a minor scheduling conflict, nothing worth worrying about. I pressed my lips together, swallowing down the wave of disappointment that rose in me. I didn't blame Lily for wanting to celebrate her own success, but I couldn't ignore how clear it was her priorities, and our families, had never been with me. I tried to keep my tone light. "I understand, but I hope everyone can still arrange to be at my graduation. I've been planning for this for a long time." Lily replied quickly, as if eager to end the call. "Yeah, we'll see." And that was it, no questions about the ceremony's time, no definite promise to be there. I set my phone down feeling like I'd just spoken to a distant acquaintance rather than my own sister. A week later, when I came home after a night class, my phone rang again. It was my mother. She casually mentioned helping Lily arrange the seating for her guests, then, just as casually, dropped this. "That morning, your father and I will stop by Lily's BBQ first. If we have time in the afternoon, we'll come to your graduation." I sat frozen in my chair, picturing the drive from San Antonio to Austin at least an hour and a half without traffic, and this was on a weekend. If they stayed at the BBQ until noon, there was no way they could make it to the ceremony that started at 2 p.m. I knew it, and my mother knew it too, yet she spoke as if this were a reasonable compromise. I kept my voice steady. "Mom, if everyone has already chosen the BBQ, that's fine. I don't want anyone to feel forced." She went quiet for a moment before changing the subject, asking about the kids. I listened, but my mind had already drifted elsewhere. For as long as I could remember, I'd grown used to being the afterthought. From birthdays to award ceremonies, there had always been some reason for their absence, and that reason almost always had something to do with Lily. In the days that followed, I kept telling myself that at least I still had Mark and the kids. In my mind, I pictured Mark holding Noah's and Grace's hands, sitting in the front row, his eyes following me as I walked across the stage. That image became the anchor that kept me steady as I continued preparing, even though somewhere deep inside, there was still a dull ache. I thought that as long as my husband and children were there, the absence of my parents and Lily would hurt a little less. I didn't realize just how naive I was to believe that at the very least, Mark would understand how important this day was to me. For 6 years, he had seen me study late into the night, drive to work bleary-eyed in the mornings, and turn down invitations just to finish a paper. If anyone could understand the weight of this moment, I was sure it would be him. And because of that, I hadn't prepared myself for the possibility that even that last fortress could fall. In the meantime, I occasionally came across Lily's new posts about the BBQ party, photos of the backyard being set up with white tents, snapshots of the barbecue menu, a picture of her standing with a celebrity chef in San Antonio. Each image felt like a reminder that on the day I had dreamed about for 6 years, my family's laughter and presence would be somewhere else. But I stayed silent. Not because I didn't care, but because I had learned long ago that sometimes silence is the only way to avoid hurting yourself even more. The afternoon before graduation, just as I was leaving work, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was as steady as ever as she talked about how Lily's BBQ was almost ready, how guests had started confirming they would attend. Then, suddenly, she asked, "Is Mark bringing the kids to the barbecue early?" The question stopped me in my tracks in the middle of the parking lot, as if someone had just poured a bucket of ice water down my back. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay calm. "What do you mean by early, Mom? They'll be at the graduation with me." On the other end, my mother hesitated before saying, "Well, I thought maybe Mark would let them visit their grandparents for a bit before heading to the ceremony." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I hung up, got into my car, and sat still for several minutes, my heart pounding. I knew I had to go straight to Mark and ask him outright. When I got home, Mark was sitting on the couch, eyes fixed on the television, while Noah and Grace were on the living room floor playing with building blocks. I stood in the doorway for a moment before asking directly, "Did you promise to take the kids to Lily's barbecue before my graduation?" Mark looked startled at first, but quickly regained his composure. He switched off the television, leaned back into the couch, and replied casually, "I just thought, the kids really want to see their grandparents and their cousins. You know, sitting through 3 hours of a graduation ceremony just listening to names being called is boring." I froze. 6 years of late nights, early mornings, relentless work, and endless studying, and the comment he had for me on the eve of my biggest day was boring? I felt something crack inside me. "Do you understand that this is the most important day of my life in the last 6 years? I've dreamed of this moment of walking onto that stage and seeing my family there, supporting me." My voice began to shake, my eyes burned, but I fought to keep the tears back. Mark sighed and rubbed his temples as if I were overreacting. "I never said I wouldn't be there. I just thought, maybe we could compromise. I'll take the kids to the barbecue first so they can have some fun, and then we'll all meet at the restaurant after the ceremony." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. His compromise meant I would walk across that stage, look down at the seats reserved for my family, and see them empty, just like I had hundreds of times before. At the very moment I needed them most, they would be somewhere else. The tears began to spill, not from weakness, but from the sharp, bone-deep sting of betrayal. "No, Mark. Either the whole family sits together at my graduation or not at all. I will not walk onto that stage knowing my husband and kids are off eating barbecue somewhere." I looked straight at him, my voice firmer than it had ever been. He said nothing. No protest, no agreement, just a quiet turn of his head, as if to avoid meeting my eyes. The air in the room grew heavy. Noah and Grace stopped playing and looked at us with puzzled expressions. I knew they didn't fully understand, but they could feel the tension. That night, we barely spoke. I went upstairs early and sat on the bed, staring at the navy dress already hanging on the closet door. I had imagined putting it on in joy and pride, surrounded by my family, but now that image had been replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. I remembered Mark's earlier words. "The kids and I will be in the front row." Hearing them again now, they felt less like a promise and more like something he'd said just to give me temporary comfort. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw myself standing on stage, looking down at a row of empty VIP seats. I had already lived through a childhood filled with too many disappointments from my parents and Lily, and I had hoped marriage would be where I finally found someone to stand beside me. But even Mark, the man who once promised to always be there, had now chosen to put the fun of the kids above being present for the most important day of his wife's life. I knew I couldn't control other people's choices, but I could control my own boundaries. And I set one with Mark that night. Either he would be there with the kids, or I would walk alone this time without holding back or pretending everything was fine. The next morning, I woke up to a house so silent I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. No sound of Noah's feet running to the kitchen for cereal. No Grace chattering about what dress she should wear today. On the kitchen table sat a folded piece of paper, neatly placed beside a still steaming cup of coffee. Mark's handwriting precise and cold. "Taking the kids to the barbecue. We'll try to make it back in time. Congrats, Mark." I stood there, the paper trembling in my hand. The words, "we'll try," felt like a small blade, slowly twisting into me. 6 years of sacrifice, and he had reduced it to 2 words, "we'll try." I didn't cry. I think I had run out of tears the night before. Instead, I folded the note, slipped it into my purse, and went upstairs to get dressed. The navy dress I had pressed the day before hung silently, as if it were waiting for a different ceremony, a ceremony where people actually wanted to be there. I did my own hair and makeup, step by step, as if I were preparing for an important presentation at work rather than the graduation I had been working toward for 6 years. No knock at the door asking if I needed help. No little voice saying, "Mom, you look so pretty." Everything was quiet to the point of suffocation. I drove to campus, the familiar route feeling longer than usual. The parking lot was packed, families gathered outside the auditorium with flowers, balloons, and cameras. I walked in alone, one hand holding my purse, the other clutching the envelope with extra tickets no one would use. An usher led me to the VIP section. The first 6 seats all empty. On the back of each was a small sign reading, "Reserved for family of Emily Carter." The word family hit me like a cruel joke. The ceremony began. The MC introduced the honored guests, then each graduate's name was called. Applause erupted again and again, cheers from the family rose mixing with the rapid clicks of cameras. I sat still, gripping the mock certificate the organizers handed out before the official degrees were presented. Every so often, I glanced at my phone out of habit, only to regret it. Facebook and Instagram were flooded with photos from the barbecue. Lily in a red dress, standing with her guests, a glass of wine in hand. My parents seated in the middle of the yard, smiling brightly. Noah and Grace playing a ball toss game with their cousins. Mark at the grill, tongs in hand, smiling easily. Not a single picture hinted that today was my graduation. When the MC called my name, Emily Carter, I stood up. Applause filled the room, but not from the people I wanted to hear most. I walked across the stage, accepted my diploma from the dean, smiled for the photographer, and turned back toward the audience. The VIP row was still completely empty, the stage lights hitting the reserved seats and making the fabric gleam in a way that felt almost mocking. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat and kept walking until I stepped off the stage. The moment my foot hit the last step, my phone began buzzing over and over in my pocket. I pulled it out to see a notification. "We need to talk. Urgently. Mark." Underneath it was a number that made me blink and look again. 45 missed calls, all from him. My heart started pounding, a mix of panic and confusion. I was just about to call him back when another message flashed across the screen. "It's about Noah, call me now." My whole body went cold. In an instant, every ounce of anger and hurt I'd been carrying was shoved aside, replaced by a surge of fear. I didn't know what had happened, only that whatever I had feared about their absence was suddenly small compared to the dread building in my chest. I stood frozen in the hallway as the noise of the ceremony faded into the background, gripping my phone and bracing myself for an answer I never wanted to hear on this day. I hit call immediately, my heart racing so hard it felt like it might break through my ribs. Mark picked up before the first ring had finished, his voice urgent. Noah got burned at the barbecue. I've taken him to the hospital in San Antonio. Can you get here? I went numb for a second, my mind blank. Burned? How? Is it serious? I asked in a rush. Mark replied quickly. He was playing near the grill, someone wasn't paying attention, and hot sauce spilled on his arm. The doctors are checking him, it's not life-threatening, but you should come. Without another word, I shoved the phone into my pocket and bolted for the parking lot. The sound of my heels pounding against the concrete, the brush of my dress against my legs, all of it faded beneath the roar of blood in my ears. I yanked open the car door, tossed my purse onto the passenger seat, and started the engine. The drive from Austin to San Antonio was nearly 130 kilometers, but I couldn't tell you how many red lights I blew through that day. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. Every passing minute, my mind spun through worst-case scenarios, and tears began to rise partly from fear for Noah, partly from the cruel irony of it all. The day I had dreamed about for 6 years was ending with me speeding toward a hospital where my entire family had gathered, not to support me, but to deal with an accident. When I reached the hospital, the parking lot was packed. I ended up leaving my car several hundred meters from the entrance and running the rest of the way. The moment I stepped into the waiting area, I saw them, all of them. My parents, Lily's boyfriend, Mark, and Noah, sitting on a hospital bed with his left arm wrapped in bandages. Grace sat beside him, her eyes red and puffy. The whole group spoke in hushed tones, their faces tense but close, connected in a way I had never been able to reach. I stepped forward, and Noah immediately spotted me. "Mom," he called out. I wrapped him in my arms, breathing in the scent of his hair as if to reassure myself that everything really was okay. The doctor explained that the burn was second-degree serious enough to require bandaging and monitoring, but it wouldn't leave permanent damage. I thanked him, though my chest was still trembling from the fear I'd just endured. When a nurse took Noah to change his bandages, I turned back to face the rest of the family. The air seemed to sink heavier. Every pair of eyes was on me, yet no one spoke first. Maybe they were waiting for me to scold them for the accident, or to press for details. But what I was about to say wasn't just about today, it was about a lifetime of being put last. I stood tall, my voice so calm it surprised even me. There's one thing I need to ask all of you. Just one question. I looked at each of them, my parents, Lily, and finally Mark. If this accident hadn't happened, was anyone planning to show up at my graduation today? The room froze. My mother glanced away, my father stared down at his nails, Lily pressed her lips together, and Mark only let out a quiet sigh, saying nothing. The silence was so heavy, I could almost hear it hit the floor. I went on, my voice starting to shake not from weakness, but from the anger that had been compressed inside me for years. For 6 years, I have worked day and night, balancing family and studies, to earn this degree. I hoped that just once, you would be there not out of obligation, but because you wanted to see me succeed. But this morning, I woke up in an empty house, with a note that read like a congratulation to a stranger. And while I stood alone in a row of empty VIP seats, you were all here eating, drinking, laughing. Don't tell me you were busy, because it's clear I was never the priority. 1. Lily opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. No, I don't need explanations today, I've heard the reasons my entire life. Every important moment of mine has always had something unmissable for Lily, and you all chose to be with her. Mom, Dad, you've always told me to be independent, and I've done that. But the cost is that I've never felt I truly had a place in this family. And Mark. I turned to my husband, meeting his tired eyes. You were the one person I believed would never let me down. Yet you chose to let our kids be at a party instead of watching their mother graduate. Do you have any idea what it felt like to stand on that stage and see no one there for me? No one answered. The low hum of the air conditioner above became the only sound in the room. I looked around, trying to burn this moment into my memory so I would never forget what it felt like to be abandoned, not just once, but over and over until it became second nature to them. Finally, I drew in a deep breath, turned my back, and walked out of the room. I knew I needed air before what I'd just said turned into an anger I couldn't control. And in that exact moment, I realized I had reached my limit. There was no longer any space for excuses or fragile hope that they might change. Today, they had answered the question I'd carried my whole life, not with words, but with their absence. When the doctor confirmed that Noah only needed to stay in the hospital for one more night under observation and could go home in stable condition, the weight in my chest eased slightly. But the moment I stepped out of his room into that long, stark white hallway, I knew I couldn't get back into my car and return with everyone as if nothing had happened. I found Mark sitting in the waiting area, his eyes glued to his phone. I stopped in front of him, waiting until he looked up. I'm staying at a hotel for a week, I said, my voice calm but resolute. I need time to think. Mark frowned in surprise. Emily, this isn't the time. But I cut him off. No, this is exactly the time. I can't go on like before, as if I didn't just stand alone at my own graduation. I need distance. He stayed silent, perhaps realizing that this time I wasn't speaking to seek comfort or negotiate. I had made up my mind. I left the hospital and drove back to Austin that night without stopping at home. Instead, I booked a room at a small hotel near downtown. It had a balcony overlooking the lit-up streets, crisp white sheets, and a single armchair by the window. I set my bag down, sank into that chair, and for the first time in months, took a deep breath without feeling choked by someone else's pressure or expectations. On my first day at the hotel, I barely left the room. I silenced my phone, ignored my messages, and just lay on the bed, letting my mind go blank. The next morning, when I finally turned my phone back on, dozens of messages poured in. Mark wrote that Noah and Grace missed me, that he was sorry if he had hurt me. My parents sent a long message saying they didn't think their absence at my graduation would hurt me as much as it did, and hoped I could forgive them. Lily sent a short one. I'm sorry, sis. I was wrong to put the barbecue first. I read them all but didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I needed them and myself to understand that an apology can't erase the scars that have been layered over years. Midweek, an email from the company arrived. The board of directors was announcing my appointment as chief financial officer after the current CFO's retirement. I read the email 3 times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. 6 years of effort, sacrificing personal time, carrying double the pressure, everything had led to this moment. But, strangely, I didn't cry or scream with joy. Instead, I sat still, allowed a faint smile to form, and felt a rare sense of peace. I realized I had achieved exactly what I had set out to do, and I had done it without the cheering or validation of those who had overlooked me. In the days that followed, I began going out more. I visited Noah and Grace at school during their lunch break. They ran to hug me, both happy and a little confused. I didn't talk much about what was happening between me and Mark, only asked about their classes and told them a few funny stories from work. I wanted them to know that, no matter what, I was still their mother, and my love for them had not changed. In the evenings, I walked along the lake shore, stopping at a small coffee shop I had always passed by in a hurry before. I sat there for hours, reading, listening to the murmur of conversations around me, and realized I had forgotten what it felt like to live for myself. Not to meet my family's expectations, not to prove anything, but simply to live because I wanted to. Throughout that week, I thought a lot about the idea of forgiveness. I no longer felt the boiling anger I had on the first day. Instead, there was a cold clarity. I didn't harbor hatred, but I also wasn't willing to return to the same cycle where I kept compromising while they continued to push me to the sidelines. Forgiveness, I realized, did not mean allowing someone the chance to hurt me again. On my seventh night at the hotel, I sat on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker, and made a promise to myself. From now on, I would set clear boundaries. I would not beg for presence or acknowledgement from anyone. If someone wanted to be in my life, they would have to choose to stay with the respect and priority I deserved. And if not, I was ready to walk away alone, but no longer lonely. On Sunday morning, exactly 1 week after leaving home, I packed my belongings in the hotel room. As I stepped out the door, I felt I wasn't returning as a wife shrinking herself for the sake of keeping the peace, but as someone who had laid the foundation for a new life of her own. When I got home, Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in front of him gone cold. He looked at me as if bracing for an outburst or an accusation, but I hadn't come to fight. I sat down, set my keys on the table, and met his eyes. Mark, if we're going to continue this marriage, there are changes that have to happen. You need to respect my goals, and we are going to share family responsibilities equally, from raising the kids to running the household. He stayed silent but didn't look away. I went on. I will not accept being treated as a second choice, not even by my own husband. If I've given everything to support you and the kids, I deserve that in return. There were no grand promises from him, just a slow, measured nod. But for me, that was a starting point. A few days later, I met my parents and Lily at a cafe near my house. We sat around a small round table, no parties, no outsiders, just family and the words that needed to be said. I began calmly but firmly. From now on, I will not be part of relationships that only go one way. If you want me to show up, you also need to be willing to show up for me. My father tried to explain that my graduation day was a special circumstance. My mother said she didn't realize I'd be so hurt, and Lily kept her eyes down as she apologized. I listened to everything, but didn't respond with the kind of smoothing over I used to. I simply said, I accept your apology, but these boundaries will not change. From that day, I kept a measured distance, not cutting ties, but not reaching out if everything was only about their needs. At first, things felt awkward, but I knew real change often began with discomfort. A month later, when my new role as CFO had begun to settle into a rhythm, Lily called me unexpectedly. Her voice was tentative but clear. I want to host a small party to celebrate you, your graduation, your promotion, everything. Not a big party, just family. I was surprised, but I agreed. The gathering took place in Lily's backyard, the same place where that infamous barbecue had been held. But this time, there was no music drowning out greetings, no crowd of friends or business partners packed in, only family. My parents brought a cake with the words, "We're proud of you, Emily," typed across the top. Mark stayed by my side the entire evening, introducing me to a couple of Lily's neighbors as my wife, the new CFO at the largest real estate company in Austin. Noah and Grace ran around laughing, occasionally coming to hug me and proudly telling their grandparents that their mom was really smart. I had no illusion that a single gathering could erase a lifetime of favoritism and hurt, but I saw something different. They had begun to understand just how much their presence mattered to me. And for the first time, I no longer felt like the shadow standing at the edge. When the party ended, I stood on the steps, looking out at the yard. The warm yellow lights fell across familiar faces, and I realized a simple truth. I no longer needed them to define my worth. Their acknowledgement could warm my heart, but it no longer determined who I was. On the drive home, Mark behind the wheel, I rested my head against the window, watching the city lights pass by. I thought about the road I had traveled, from a girl overlooked in her own family to a woman standing firmly on her own, setting boundaries and demanding respect. I didn't hate anyone, but I had learned to love myself enough not to accept less than what I deserved. If anyone asked me the biggest lesson from all of this, I would say, your worth does not depend on whether your family recognizes it or not. Setting boundaries isn't about pushing people away, it's about protecting yourself, so you can heal and live a life where you are truly valued. And even if that means walking alone in some moments, it is still the road that leads to true freedom. Thank you for listening this far, and I'll see you in the next story.